What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Master League for online PvP and discussing exactly what you may want to use, some of the top options, as well as adding in a bonus budget option section. Because honestly, at the end of the day, we kind of know the ideal meta. That does not mean that everyone's going to be able to afford those legendary Pokemon, powering them all the way up, unlocking secondary charge moves. So we've got like the ideal meta, and then of course we've got what people are actually going to use. I may end up making a follow-up kind of dependent on what people end up using at kind of like the league that I'm at, rank 9 right now. So that should be kind of interesting. But anyways, I hope you do enjoy this episode. If it is helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. So let's go ahead and jump into this. What I'm going to do is actually start from the bottom of the list and work up. The reason for that is because there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of legendary Pokemon at the top of this league, but because they are so expensive to, of course, power up, and then simultaneously also expensive to unlock a secondary charge move, I want to cover the bottom first because realistically speaking, you are more likely to see some of these Pokemon than some of those legendaries, or at least all of those legendaries. And I also wanted to point out a couple things. As far as IVs are concerned, you're going to want to go with a perfect set of IVs. It's a lot simpler than some of the other leagues with Ultra and Great League, where sometimes you need a full-on maxed out one, sometimes you need some kind of weird IVs. In this case, it's just going to be a perfect IV, just like what you would want for the raids. So I'm very excited about this, so let's go ahead and jump into it. When we take a look at the bottom of the list, I would argue that a lot of people could potentially be using a Swampert. That's going to be a really hot pick, and because it's going to be a starter, or because it is a starter, because it only costs 10,000 Stardust to unlock a secondary charge move, honestly, a lot of people, and people have been trading it a lot, like for the community days, Swampert is basically going to be like one of the best budget picks, and I think a lot of people are going to use it. So even if you don't see a grass type on this entire list, because Swampert is double weak to the grass typing, you may want to consider bringing on a grass type Pokemon to kind of counter that Swampert, because like I said before, it's probably going to be one of the more common budget options. You might see it a lot despite it being ranked 29 on this list. Another one that I think a lot of people might be interested in as far as this bottom one is concerned is going to be Togekis. I think Togekis is once again one of those budget options. If you can unlock the secondary charge move when it is in its baby form, only 10,000 Stardust for that. Togekis did really well in the Ultra League, so for me, I might want to go ahead and power it up for it to be ready for the Masters League, just because I have a Clefable that is ready for the Ultra League. So because I kind of have some overlap for those charm type attackers, I might go ahead and opt to get that Togekis up versus having one at Ultra League and having it at Masters. So maybe consider doing that with a couple of these Pokemon. Go ahead and bump them up depending on where they're going to be better at. I think Togekis could be a solid option, so that'll be kind of interesting. Some of these other ones are fairly common. Tyranitar, I mean, it could be good, but I just worry about Tyranitar and the number of weaknesses that it has. So I think Swampert and Togekis are like the best Pokemon from that row. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. As far as budget options are concerned, I think Dragonite is going to win out of all of these options. So Dragonite, a lot of people kind of have had it for a very long period of time. Maybe you ended up powering it up, maybe you didn't. I know that I've got like some level 34s, level 35s. So getting it up to level 40 really isn't going to be that big of a deal. A little bit expensive on unlocking the secondary charge move, but Dragonite could be solid because of it having those Dragon types attacks. There's going to be so many Dragon type Pokemon, so it could be good to get some of that kind of stab damage off of that. And then another kind of interesting Pokemon that I was personally looking at quite a bit is Groudon. And the reason for this is it's kind of got some interesting moves. It's going to be one of the better ground type Pokemon. We're going to kind of take a look out for Garchomp. So maybe Garchomp is going to be kind of like the alternative option to it. We're just going to have to kind of take a look at it. But with Groudon, I was kind of interested in Solar Beam. The reason for that is because, like we mentioned before with Swampert, you would kind of have some coverage in that regards where you could get some kind of like a stab or a super effective move off of Swampert. But that's kind of like an off-meta pick, so I just wanted to go ahead and point that out. And then up next, when we go into the third row, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Garchomp row. So Garchomp is technically considered one of the more budget options. I don't know if I completely agree with that assessment. A lot of people have been kind of saying that it's technically a budget option compared to a legendary Pokemon, but it's super rare. So even if you get yourself a Garchomp, you also have to have the candy to power it up and unlock a secondary charge move. So to that extent, is it really going to be a budget option? I personally don't think so, but it's going to be worth it. Regardless of if it's classified as budget or not, Garchomp is going to be an amazing Pokemon. It's going to do so much damage. Mudshot is going to be able to really charge up the energy very quickly. And Outrage could get, of course, super effective damage against those other Dragon-type Pokemon, which there are going to be a lot of them. So definitely kind of keep an eye out on Garchomp. Up next, I think there's going to be two more Pokemon probably worth highlighting out of this row, and that's going to be Snorlax as well as Metagross. So for Snorlax, we actually saw Snorlax being a very good counter in the Ultra League as well, especially against some of those Giratinas, which I can promise you, later on the list, you can tell a lot of people are probably going to be using Giratina again, so Snorlax could end up being a very good option. It ends up opting to go with Heavy Slam over something else, but you could go with the super effective Outrage. I personally use that, found that to be great. You've got, if you are using that dragon move, you can be super effective against all of those dragons, and then maybe keep Body Slam just to kind of spam, and then Lick is going to be great against those Giratinas, which you will most likely end up seeing. And then finally, we've got Metagross. Now, Metagross is just a beast to begin with. It's got Meteor Mash. That's going to be amazing. It could end up being a very good counter to a Pokemon like Togekis, because Togekis is going to be, of course, weak to the Steel typing just because it is a Fairy type. I think it's going to be one of those situations where we could end up having a very good counter up against that Togekis by using Metagross. So I think Metagross could be very solid. And then also, if you end up going with Earthquake, luckily for me, I have a Metagross fully powered up. So I'm just going to unlock a secondary charge move, and that's it. So that's going to be the only investment for PvP. You've got that Earthquake. You can go up against those Steel-type Pokemon, and you will be able to counter some of them, such as Dialga. That's going to be a good counter, and then maybe something like a Melmetal as well. So I kind of like the idea of adding on an Earthquake to that, so I'm very excited about that. Up next, when we move on to the next row, man, this row is getting dense with some amazing Pokemon in this case. So one interesting thing to point out is Armored Mewtwo not having Size Strike. Once Size Strike gets added, we'll have to see how it ends up working out, but most people would probably opt to go with this as well, and that's going to be like a Mewtwo. Now, I personally have some Mewtwo's actually already fully powered up. I have Psycho Cut, I have Size Strike, I don't have a secondary charge move unlocked. That might be the only investment I have to make, but I think that this would be one of the more common Pokemon that people already have up to level 40. The only investment is going to be unlocking a secondary charge move, so if you see a Mewtwo, maybe people have it unlocked, but more than likely, they're probably going to have Size Strike. They're probably going to have Shadow Ball. And then as far as like another pick, Melmetal could be common, but because it was so dominant in the Great League and the Ultra League, you would have to have some deep resources to have a Melmetal dedicated to all three leagues and unlocking a secondary charge move. Now, I like to always point this out for Mew. I don't think anyone is really going to use a Mew because it is such a TM trap. It's very difficult to use a Mew just because you can't obtain the moveset that you actually want to use. Because you can't have multiple Mew, you're going to have to dedicate it to one of them. I don't see people going up into the Masters League with a Mew. But hey, if you've already powered one up, you may be like, well, I can't use it for the Ultra, I can't use it for the Great. Then you would, of course, use it for the Masters League. Latios and Latias are kind of interesting, but we'll see. I don't think a lot of people necessarily have these powered up just because from the raid side, not that great. So we'll see. We'll see on these two Pokemon. I mean, I would personally like to go for Latios just because it does have Dragon Claw, and there's so many Dragon-type Pokemon to kind of take a look at. So that's just something to kind of consider. And then finally, when we make it up to this top row, we are going to see those Giratina Trouble Boys. Oh, man. I was looking forward to not seeing them after the Ultra League. But guess what? They ended up being on the top list when we got into the Masters League as well. So for these Pokemon, people may have the resources for that. So you're going to have to consider a counter to these. Make sure you have a counter to the Giratinas. We mentioned Snorlax. That could probably be like one of the better kind of budget picks to kind of counter it. But I don't know. Man, I was really hoping we see people use something different. But unfortunately, that's probably not going to happen. But we actually have a new Giratina for the Masters League, and that is going to be Dialga. A lot of people are going to be using Dialga if you are serious about Master League PvP. So many people are going to be using it, so you are going to have to make sure that you have a counter to Dialga. And honestly, I'm thinking that Metagross is looking like the #1 budget option pick when you are going up against Dialga. And of course, make sure to hit it with that Earthquake so you can get the super effective damage against it. Dialga is such a beast in this league. You can just kind of bet some of the top tier people like, rank 10, maybe kind of mid, rank 9, they're going to be using a fully powered up Dialga. So that's going to be an absolute nightmare to go up against. And then finally, another one that I think is kind of worth pointing out is Kyogre. So a lot of people may actually already have a Kyogre fully powered up just because it is a very good raid Pokemon. So maybe unlocking a secondary charge move to pick up that Thunder. But at the same time, if you don't have a Kyogre fully powered up and ready to go, the good budget equivalent to that is probably going to be the Swampert that we ended up covering earlier. So this is going to be like the top 30 Pokemon that we'll take a look at. I'm glad we got to talk about some of these, point out some of them as far as like budget options and stuff are concerned, and which Pokemon I think people are actually going to use versus what is shown on the screen. It doesn't always work out that way. So I think Masters League is going to be way more interesting than what people think because resources start to really get in the way to decide for what people can actually do. Even if they want to do it, they simply can't do it. But anyways, I hope you did enjoy this episode. If you found it helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And go ahead and let us know what you plan to use in the Masters League below. List out the Pokemon, list out their movesets, let us know in the comments section below, and I will see you next time. If you want to develop a deeper connection, I would highly recommend you to check out Patreon. We've got a lot of really cool things going on over there. Check out all of these supporters that we have. We are almost up to 100. We are also posting some special content, some behind the scenes work. And if that is the type of thing that interests you, I would highly recommend you to check it out.